Hello friends, I'm Kayla. This is my September wrap up. I read this many books. I don't know how many there are. It'll be in my stats. And I posted a picture on Instagram asking if you had any questions or ways to organize the wrap up, and that just makes it fun for me, so I appreciate it so much. A couple people suggested that I organize it based on the season, and I took it as more the cover and the look of the book rather than the plot itself. So I did organize it by what I think the cover gives fall the least to the most. And then I have a whole bunch of questions that I need to assign a different book throughout this, like which book do I feel like I could recommend to anybody, a book my younger self would have not enjoyed, an author I would read again, a cover I would get tattooed. If I had to reread one of those, which it would be, if any of these are good queer recs, if a different author wrote it, I think I would like it better. So I'm gonna answer all of those while I go through the stack. We're gonna start right here with One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This to me just has a pretty beachy summery cover, so I don't associate it with fall. I ended up giving it a 4-star, which makes it my favorite Taylor Jenkins Reid, even though I've only read 2. This is about a woman who we're following her in her teenage years and her falling in love with this guy and the world that they create for themselves. They love traveling, they love each other. They get married, and then a year later he goes missing, and we follow her through that grief, and then also finally moving on and falling in love for the second time, and how different her life is in the present, where she's with this other guy. She has a totally different life. She's working at her family bookstore, which she never thought she would do because she's always wanted to travel the world, and she was traveling the world with her first love. And after those two get engaged, she gets a call saying that her husband, who she thought was dead, isn't actually dead. He's been missing in the wilderness, surviving, just trying to get back to her. And when he comes back, he wants to pick up where they left off, but she is in a completely different situation. And there's a lot of heartwarming, just loving feelings throughout this. Her current relationship, he wants to support her, even though it's devastating to him, exploring her relationship and where they left off, because how could he not allow her to explore her feelings with her husband? Meanwhile, they're both just desperately in love with her and also want the best for her and want her to be her true self, but she doesn't even know who that is. Is it based on who she's with, or is it just how old she is? And really ask that question, what makes a person, and what is her true feelings and her true love? I liked it. That's all I have to say about it. Next, I have a couple flowery covers, which naturally don't feel very fall. This one, in fact, feels a little Christmassy, even though it's set in the summer. It's called Corpse and the Carnations by Dale Meyer. This is a not good cozy mystery series. Now, I read a good amount of cozy mystery. I have read, there's probably like between 15 and 20 that I've read, and even though the tone of them is supposed to be silly and lighthearted and the mysteries are supposed to be easy to solve, I still rate some of them highly. They do still accomplish things, even though I know traditionally I'm looking for something a little grittier. I think cozy mysteries are just a nice reprieve from the other things that I'm reading. So when I say that it's a not good one, like I actually mean it, not just that I am maybe overly critiquing some of them for being too easy to solve when that is the point of cozy mystery. It's just that this is not a well-written series. It's not well constructed. It repeats a lot of the same character names. It doesn't really take the other books into account. It's not really interesting to follow the plot and the main character's life. Her name is Dorian, and she's just moved into her grandmother's old house, and she is finding dead bodies at every turn. In every book, there's a different cold case that she's solving. Even though she's not a detective, she just keeps coming into contact with all of these things and getting involved. And in a lot of series like this, the main character's storyline and the mystery are both equal parts that you care about and you want to read about. But in this series, like, you don't come to really care about Doreen or what she's dealing with. You don't really get a lot of insight into how she's feeling and how her relationships are building. It all feels very surface level. I think the other 2 books I gave a 2, and this one I'm giving a little bit more. I think a 2.25. This is going to be a trend throughout this video. My ratings have gotten very aggressively specific for no reason. But if you haven't been following along, I've been reading this series because it's set in the town where I live. And in this one, she goes to this flower place, a local garden, and she finds a dead body there. But she also witnessed that woman like the day before or earlier that day in a fight, and so she thinks she knows who the culprit is. Indeed, in the end, she solves the mystery. The videos have been really fun to make, but I cannot torture myself through it anymore, except I think I'll pick up the last one just to see where Dorian is. This author has written all 25 of these books in like 4 years, along with like 3 or 4 other long spanning series. So she's just pumping out books. And I think the last one in this alphabet kind of series will be out a year from now. Next up, we've got Family Lore by Elizabeth Acevedo. This has flowery vibes on it that gives a spring summer tone. Now, Elizabeth Acevedo is one of my favorite authors. I have given all of her YA books 5 stars. This is her foray into adult literature, and I think a lot of themes go through all of her books. There's pregnancy and love, incarceration and sexual freedom, and family, lots of family dynamics and cheating, hardship. You can definitely tell this is by the same author based on all of that, but I just think I was lacking the really beautiful writing that I know her for. I still enjoyed the audiobook. She narrated as usual along with a couple other people, and I think it was well done. The story and the plot itself just didn't turn out to be the most interesting. You're learning about this family and 4 sisters, and they all have different magical qualities. One of them can predict death, one of them can always tell when someone is lying, and the one who can predict death decides to put on a living wake for herself for her family to all come together and celebrate her. And because that's happening, people assume that she has seen her own death or seen someone else's death, and they all do what she has asked. And along the way, you're hearing from them in the past and how their relationship has become the way that it is, all of the relationships, all of the trials that they've been through. Some of them have children. They become involved in this story. There's interviews that are fun to read. It was relatively interesting, like enough to finish, but I just gave it a 3 in the end. I thought it was fine. It reminded me of I don't want to say the plot, but like my experience, my feelings while reading The Inheritance and Orchidia Divina and Tell the Wolves I'm Home. So if you really liked these, and if you like books that are multi-generational, where especially younger people are considering their parents as real adults and learning about them and accepting them and all of their flaws and connecting in the wake of like tragedy or hardship, then I would definitely recommend Family Lore. It's not that this disappointed me truly in any way. I just don't think that this is really my type of story. I can't think of many books that I've read like this that I gave a super high rating. So that's my bad, but of course I'm gonna pick up anything that she writes and I'll continue to read her next adult book and just follow her journey as an author, because of course with the 3 5 stars I've given her before, I'm gonna pick up anything. The question somebody asked about this one is, would I recommend this as someone's first Elizabeth Acevedo? And I would say if you read a lot of YA and you love YA, pick up her YA stuff first. But if you are an adult and this is the type of story that you enjoy, I would say pick this up instead of her YA. Next up, just because this maybe genre-wise feels seasonally appropriate, it's a mystery book, I'm putting The Housemaid here because the colors of it aren't giving the fall vibes compared to the oranges and reds and yellows to come. I gave this one a 3 as well. It's a easy, fast-paced as far as writing, not necessarily like action heavy until you get to maybe 2/3 of the way in kind of plot. It's not super sophisticatedly written or constructed. It's just like a wild, interesting time. I think a lot of people could find themselves enamored and just want to like rush through this book. So we've got a woman who has a dark kind of criminal past, and she is interviewing for this housemaid position, and the woman interviewing her is kind of wishy-washy, and as she moves into the house and gets welcomed in, the rules and her job gets more and more confusing, as she doesn't know if she's just responsible for cleaning up or if she's responsible for feeding them every meal, if she's responsible completely for taking care of their child, and she doesn't really know if she's doing the right thing. She gets in trouble a lot. Her job seems at risk, but she desperately needs this job. She doesn't have a lot of other opportunities, and yeah, the book just goes from there as you find out her past and the messy family secrets. There's this marriage. There's obviously a child involved, and it's just a little chaotic as she meets up with different people in town. They all have different views on this family, and she learns things throughout it. There's kind of a perspective shift as we go through it. Though I know a varied amount of people can enjoy this, I would most recommend it to people who are just kicking off their mystery journey. As for the question if I will continue in the series, I will not. Next up, I put all my white books here because they feel more wintry than anything else. Starting with some nonfiction that I read that It's not fair of me to review self-help or self-improvement a lot of the time because I'm not picking it up, or the ones that I've read this year, because of my own desire for improvement. They're almost always selected for me in different videos, and I like exploring these things to see if there's anything I can gain from them. This is what I would actually answer though for the question of something that I feel like I could broadly recommend to anybody, because I think that if you're already interested in this kind of book, there is going to be a good takeaway for anybody who's reading it, even myself, who I don't feel like I was looking to learn the things that she wanted to teach me. In 101 Essays That Will Change the Way You Think by Brianna Weist, she shares, 101 things, so I can't sum them all up, but she's talking about things like how you can't let fear control you, why fear can be good, how you might be limiting your own success just by not believing in yourself, how self-improvement and happiness are about the journey, not just the destination, and that you're learning so many things on your way to what you deem as success or accomplishing your goals. And while I don't think I'm struggling with a lot of things she set out to teach, there's also moments where she's writing essays about how successful maybe you don't even realize that you are. Or there's just this fun one about experiences we don't have English words for yet, and just runs down a list of things that are really relatable and cutesy. I think it can also help you understand other people, like why we subconsciously love to create problems for ourselves. I think it can help you acknowledge things that you don't love about other people, but then can also give you the language of how to help somebody if they're coming to you with their struggles. And I think there's something for everybody in here. The majority of this book is about changing your mindset and being happier. And I think that that's a positive thing to put out into the world. Because my mindset did not change at any point, I don't feel like I can correctly rate that or review it. Then I have Brain Rules for Aging Well, which is about how your brain ages and how you can work with your brain, keep yourself engaged, retain your memory, etc. There were just interesting facts to read in here, like your brain consumes 20% of what you eat. And then there was also things like warning signs of Alzheimer's, how your sleep might change as you age. Its target demographic is most definitely older than myself, so I will hold on to this, and I think it'll be something good to reflect on in my later years. Next up, I've got One for My Enemy, which I just think would have to be the one that I would answer if I had to get a tattoo of any of these covers, because there's really not much else up here. Maybe East of Eden or something on this cover. I'm not going to get a rabbit tattoo as much as it would be on brand. I think that this just has a kind of tattoo style, as does this. So these would be my answers, though I wouldn't want either of these tattooed on my body. If I had to, gun to my head or sword to my throat, I'm getting the sword. Oh, also somebody asked, I know I'm not into this book yet, but which one would you throw? Like in a fight if you had to take someone out? And this one feels like the heftiest one, but actually maybe I would say 101 Essays, because this is just an absolute brick. And this is a little floppier, so I think I could seriously do some damage with this one. While this, I actually find that these specific Penguin editions, the Orange Collection and the Pelican Collection, maybe it's just Penguin in general, but their quality is some of the worst that I have felt. Like the way that this spine completely collapsed and the way that this one is wearing, even though it just sits on my shelves, it's very sad to me. So I guess I wouldn't want to throw East of Eden in fear of damaging the book any more than it already is. This one I gave 2.75. It's by Olivia Blake. It's my second Olivia Blake, and the same rating I think I gave The Atlas 6. So this is an urban fantasy story about rival witch families. It's inspired by Romeo and Juliet, which is why I read Romeo and Juliet this month. We've got two romantic relationships to follow, but essentially it is just about these rival families existing, not liking each other. There's a lot of family drama, obviously, in a family rivalry, but two of them are coming together, falling in love, and one of them realizes that they are rival families before the other, and they end up keeping it a secret. There is apothecary, drug-related stuff. There's a lot of inner workings of these families and dealing with this like in-between mediator. I found it to be repetitive, kind of uninteresting plot-wise. I feel like she has such good writing as far as discussing the feelings of her characters and how they're interacting and their facial expressions. Like scene to scene, the writing is good. There are a lot of really beautiful thoughts and monologues, and I loved the romance. But after that first third, after it was so fun and it was like this meet cute and there was all of this like initial tension. I just didn't really care about where the story went from there. I don't like how the magic system was explored or wasn't. I don't think that enough made sense and that she knew where she wanted to take the story. I felt like she was just writing similar scenes over and over again. And stylistically, this type of fantasy doesn't really work for me when, I don't want to give any spoilers, but I feel like the author can take anything back. Nothing feels committed. It makes the book feel unplanned when she just like takes back things that she did or things the characters have said. The ways that the magic isn't described allows for her to just be like, this just happened because it did, even though like we've never explored this before, no other character has ever done this before or will do it again in this book. It's just like, this is just the way the magic works because it wanted to. I struggled in the same way that I struggled with In a Garden Burning Gold by Rory Power. When you tell me that certain characters are so evil or so kind and generous, but then I never see any of that really play out. It makes the stakes feel super low, and I was ultimately a little bit disappointed. The more I think about it, the more annoyed I get because it had such potential for me, because I love the act of reading it and her quotes, and you really do get invested in these characters, but then the plot completely flopped. And I know that's not the most popular opinion because this has pretty high average rating, so that's that. Somebody asked which book had the most unique character names, and I feel like for me, just because a lot of them were unfamiliar culturally, and I think they are real names, but like Masha, Mashenka, I've heard of Katerina, but one character was named Katerina or Katerina. I didn't know where to put yellow in the list because it feels like a fall color, but it needed to come before the moodier colors and the blacks and oranges. Plus there's like blue on here, which just feels more fun. This is a library copy that I did put tabs in, so I'm gonna pull those out now. This is How to Break Up With Your Phone by Catherine Price. The things that I tabbed are things that I spoke about in the vlog in which I read this, I'm pretty sure, but there are chapters titled things like Your Phone is Killing Your Attention Span, which I feel like everybody already acknowledges, but it just gave explanations for how your phone is controlling your life. And then the majority of this was an experiment of her trying to break up with her phone and how that went, and different tips and tricks that she had of how to set things up in your phone as far as notifications, folders, to make it just not as a kind of mindless obsession that I think some people feel about their phones. Constantly picking it up even though nothing is happening on it, constantly opening up and closing the same apps. The number one tip for this was mindfulness and just thinking before you do things. There's a lot of discussion about social media as well, like how the actual businesses set things up, why social media is free, how you are paying for it with your eyes and with your endorsements, and if they have more to gain or if you do. I don't think I rated that one either because I didn't take all of her tips and tricks and spend that month breaking up with my phone that I didn't feel like I necessarily needed to anyway. But if you think that's something that you need, I would definitely recommend it, and I think it says all of the things that it needs to say. Next up, a couple moodier colors and covers. We've got Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. This is about a woman who lives a pretty solitary life. She is in a small town. One of her neighbors dies. She didn't necessarily like him, and she is talking to the police about what she thinks might have happened. And then throughout the book, more deaths begin to happen, and she has this strong belief that it is the animals in the forest getting their revenge, because she is very passionate about animal preservation and not eating animals, not torturing, killing, harming things for your own gain. You're in her head, and it's a lot of passion and ravings, and I often love doing that, just being in somebody's head while they're trying to figure something out and they have a lot of thoughts about the world around them. Somebody asked how I feel about Death in Her Hands as a comp for this, and I do think, and I mentioned in my vlog that I read this in, that I think the elements that I liked about this reminded me of Death in Her Hands, which was a 5-star for me. This was a 3.5, but I think it has much more broad appeal. It has an actual plot to follow. It has a much better resolution at the end, a satisfying ending. Because I love ambiguity, I almost wish that this did have an ambiguous ending. I would say it's a good mix of Death in Her Hands and Once There Were Wolves. I would recommend it to a lot of people. I think it's pretty enjoyable, but for me, like the things that she was actually talking about and thinking about outside of being obsessive in nature, which is enjoyable, and also things that I just agree with, it wasn't the most interesting or didn't go as far as I think it could have for me. Then we've got The Razor's Edge by W. Somerset Maugham, and this is a story about finding purpose, I think, and judging others for theirs. So we have a narrator who is telling us throughout the book about their experience meeting all of these people and how they're interpreting all of these people. And it's kind of this family and friendship drama seen by a kind of outsider. And he's writing the book throughout the story, which is just a really fun element. I gave this also a 3.5. He's saying things like, this conversation didn't exactly happen like this. I'm taking liberties with this. This might have happened in a different order, but just like roll with me. Like I have reasons for putting these conversations where I put them. We're learning about this family and the people surrounding them that they have relationships with. It follows a man who has a lot of trauma from the war and where he wants his life to go after that, and how other people interpret him. Other people in the story have just a different life perspective. They have more innocence, they have more wealth, they have more opportunity. And so we have a character who is obsessed with the way people view them. We have a character who could not care less about the way people view them and just wants to live a happy life, but the way that everyone views success is so different. I think each character in here is confronted with their own challenges throughout the book, and they also have to challenge their own thoughts on the values that they have. I think it had a lot of interesting things to say about how things just need to coexist. Not everyone is going to be the same. Evil and goodness are going to coexist. Joy and sadness, everything is necessary. I thought it was interesting. Gave me an insight into a time period and into a person who I was reading it because of. I'll go ahead and link all of my vlogs down below in case you want my live thoughts or to understand why I was reading a lot of these, because I think of any month this year, this is the one where I read the most things that weren't on my TBR and things were chosen for me. I also read this because of the same person. It's Poison for Breakfast by Lemony Snicket, which I definitely never would have picked up outside of the video concept. And this is about our main character, Lemony, and after eating breakfast one day, he discovers a note saying, "You just had poison for breakfast," and he goes through some time trying to figure out if that is indeed true, if he's dying. He is reflecting on different things that have happened in life, like a story he was told, a painting he saw, a conversation he had, and telling a little life lesson that he got out of each one. So it feels like a series of parables. There was a good amount of things to highlight. I thought it was generally interesting. I didn't rate this one. I think it could be good for all ages. The designation on here is 9 to 12. I don't know that I would recommend this for my kid if he would have anything to gain from it. That's not true. I think that there are life lessons for anyone to gain. I just don't know that he would care enough about the way that this story was being told to glean those lessons. It definitely is about a love of storytelling and a love of books. There was a quote in here where he said something along the lines of, "I take a book everywhere I go with me because I have never taken a book with me and not read it and regretted bringing it, but there have been many opportunities that I could have been reading. I didn't bring my book and I regretted it." I don't know if this gives fall vibes with the cover, but I think like the dead flowers a little bit and the color. And then I was more conflicted with where to place this one because I also feel like red is a fallish color, but this has more almost Valentine's feelings. It's called Letter to My Younger Self. And this I also didn't rate, I don't think. This is what I think I would answer for the question of a book my younger self would have not enjoyed, because I can look at it objectively and say, yes, I could have had more takeaways if I read this as a teenager, which is who the intended audience was. But I don't think that if I actually read it as a teenager, the teenager that I was, that I would have liked this at all. Mostly because I don't know who so many of these people are. There's 100 essays, or not essays, just thoughts, or responses to an interview question. The big issue was a magazine, or is a magazine, I don't know, where they started having these little articles where they just asked somebody to write a letter to their younger self, but they clearly had more pointed questions than that. A lot of these do, because they are from celebrities, lean towards advice for people who are in the arts or cultivating an artistic career. So they're saying things like, I wish I had gotten an agent earlier, or I'm glad that I moved to LA when I did, and I wish that I could tell my younger self that that was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, or that I should just believe in myself earlier. I think that too many of these have the same takeaway message, that it really didn't need to be a book, because there's only so many times that you can hear somebody rich and famous say, just be yourself and you can be like me. But I do think if you love celebrity culture, it would just be something interesting to have and to flip through and just read the people that maybe you know. One that would be the opposite of the answer, one that I wouldn't like when I was younger, is one that I did love when I was younger. I read this as a teen. I can't remember what age. It's Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. I reread it because last month when I read Immortal Longings, I reread Antony and Cleopatra and got an even better like takeaway from that book. And so because I was reading One for My Enemy, I thought this would be beneficial. It wasn't. Like, I don't think I gained anything more from that book because I reminded myself of what happened in here. Mostly because that's not a true retelling. It just takes some inspiration. And I think Romeo and Juliet are actually like represented by two different couples in there. But in here, if you don't know the story about Romeo and Juliet are from rival families, much like the other book I just talked about. And they fall in love. And there's death that happens between the rival families while they're falling in love, and different relationships are set up outside of their love for each other. I think they're in love with the idea of being in love or in love with each other. It's not like this passionate romance. It's more of, well, I mean, it is a tragedy. Everyone, I think, knows how this ends. I gave it a 4. I think it is my least favorite of all of the rereads that I have done of his work. Next up, we've got black and white covers, which I think give the Halloween vibes, but there are ones here that are also black and white that have Halloween imagery as well. These ones don't, but that's why I placed them where I placed them. I know I just said I don't rate a lot of nonfiction, but I did have to rate this one because it's a 5. It's called A Little Devil in America by Hanif Abdurraqib, and it is about Black performance. It's in praise of Black performance right at the top. So it goes through different moments in history, different things, different people, from Soul Train to Whitney Houston, Michael Jackson, blackface, space travel. This author is a poet, essayist, and cultural critic, and I love books that are exploring things, critiquing things. And it really was my perfect mix of personal anecdotes as if it was a memoir versus gaining knowledge about historical events. But then also there's just this really warm, inviting way that he tells you about public figures that you already know. And even if you don't, it doesn't feel like a teaching. It feels like an invitation. It feels like a reminding. So he'll say like, we all remember, you know, this Super Bowl, and here's what happened, and here's the behind the scenes that maybe you didn't know. You might remember how Whitney Houston really changed her public image at this time, and this was the response that we all had to it, and this was that feeling that we all shared when we were watching it happen. And here's the reason why it was important to her journey as an artist and how she became acceptable to other groups of people. Here's why it made us feel the way that it did. Here's why it made me specifically feel the way that I did. And then there's also essays that are much more about him and his life and his childhood, and you just get to know him throughout here. And it was just such a perfect essay collection. I cannot recommend it more. I love reading from people who just love something so desperately, and his love for the arts is so clear, and the importance of art is at the forefront of this whole book. The importance of art for storytelling, for culture, for identity, for survival. Then another specific 3.75 was Security by Gina Walsdorf. And this one hurt me rating wise because I'm obsessed with the way this was written. I love books that play with form. And as you get a couple chapters in, there's this really fun tandem storytelling going on. So 2 stories will be told at the same time. So you can choose to read it however you want, if you want to read the whole section or you want to bounce back and forth. And then it gets even more complex because sometimes there will be 4 things going on at once. And this isn't true on like every single page by any means, but it becomes more prevalent as you go through the book. I need to find an example of the one where there's like 4 at once, because it'll stop in the middle of a sentence. It'll say something like something's going on, and it ends with and then you can go and read this one, and then you have to go back and start the sentence and go, and this was happening, and this was happening. So we're following this hotel that's about to open up. It's called the Manderley, and we are watching through surveillance cameras, and we're following the people who are watching the surveillance cameras and witnessing all the things going on in the hotel. So for example, there is a manager who's just going around checking on all the rooms, making sure the people are doing their jobs. It'll flash to somebody on the elevator, the housekeeper who's traveling up the floors, and as she's looking out the elevator, she sees something happen. And in the other section, you get to see what's happening in that section, which might be somebody getting murdered. And then it'll go to the murderer itself and say, this is where the murderer went. He walked down here, he went into this room, and he killed this person. So it's a slasher, but at the same time, you are spending time doing having mundane conversations, having to read people having sex at the same time somebody on the other floor is being killed. I think a lot of people might find it unsatisfying to read that kind of story because you're just reading things that you don't feel like are important to the plot at all. But I love mundane activities. Unfortunately, even though it was so fun to read, the plot and the characters couldn't carry it. There is a mystery involved of like why the person is killing people, but it doesn't really matter, like regardless of what that was going to come to, the story and the plot and the pace was the same. Because there's so many characters, you can't feel connected to any of them, which you're not supposed to, because it's like watching, I don't know, Scream, where everyone's probably gonna die anyway, so how connected and how close are you really gonna feel? But because in a movie like Scream, you actually get to visually see the people and their emotions and their feelings, it gives you that closeness that you don't necessarily get in here. It was well crafted writing wise, but not a well crafted mystery by any means. And I wanted it to be so bad, but I think I would still recommend it because it's just an interesting time. I feel similarly about the next one that I would recommend because I've seen people love it, but I just thought it was okay. I am stuck between a 2.75 or a 3 because what I'm looking for in a thriller is to be entertained and surprised. I absolutely was not. This is the opposite. I was not entertained in any way by my murder, but I was definitely surprised. And I was not surprised at any point, but I was so desperately entertained. But because I guess I place more importance on entertainment, this one got a lower rating. So this is a speculative thriller, speculative crime fiction, which is something that always sounds good, but I just often don't love in practice. I think for the person who asked if I could enjoy this more written by another author, I would say this one maybe, just because if it was in Sarah Gailey's hands, maybe it would be a little bit shorter, it would be a little grittier. Basically, it's following this woman who was murdered by a serial killer, and we are in the future where there's this program where you can come back to life. And so we're following this woman who is in this support group with other women going through a similar thing. They have this very unique experience, obviously, and it also is just being capitalized upon by true crime people. There's like a video game kind of about their experience, and everybody is obsessed with it. And I think it talks about the obsession with true crime and critiques a lot of things. It's about the boundaries that she has to set up because people want to know, what happened. It also is about her own personal journey because she doesn't have the memories that she had before. She doesn't really remember her murder and she needs to solve it. That's the point of the book, is she's going to figure out her own murder, which is a pretty cool concept. Some of it ended up falling into the exhausted motherhood type of books that I don't often love, but I think that there were 2 reveals at different points in the book that gave you insight into what happened in the murder and if everything that you believe to be true is, that were most definitely surprising. Made the book interesting, but I just wasn't the most interested in the actual full plot itself. And honestly, it's one of the first books that I read this month and it's pretty forgettable. Like, I don't remember that much about it, clearly. Next up, we're getting into the autumnal vibes for sure. This Super Orange, East of Eden by John Steinbeck. This is about a couple different families. It's a biblical Cain and Abel inspired book where a lot of the characters resemble the relationship between Cain and Abel. They are meant to represent good and evil, but I think that it leaves you with a lot more to think about than just these caricatures. Like, does being good mean just having good intent? As the scenes progress and time passes in this story and you're meeting this family and they have 2 sons and how their dynamics are different, and then one of them has twins and it's about their dynamics, and there's clearly this embodiment of good decisions and bad decisions, but there's also so much more complexity in there as they're deciding like who they want to be in relationships with, if they want to run the family farm, like what they want to do with their lives. You get characters who make bad decisions and you get to think through if that makes them bad people. And then you get like clearly bad characters who are just despicable human beings. And the way the various people get caught up in their situation, but you also get to see like where their trauma comes from. And everybody's struggling with something, whether they're self-absorbed, whether they're trying too hard to be that like perfect child. There's characters who are defying the expectations placed on them, making their own way in the world. There's this struggle with like loyalty versus going your own way and doing your own thing. I think at the end of the day, East of Eden was a lot more accessible than I expected it to be. It was a far easier read. I read it much quicker than I thought I ever would. It is one of those books that always felt intimidating, and I had an unrealistic expectation of it. I ended up giving it 4.25 stars, but it's a weird book to try to sum up, and it's a weird book to try to sum up my actual feelings for and what I liked about it so much. I just think, like, obviously classics are classics for a reason, and that doesn't mean I'm always gonna love them, but I should never be surprised when one is like incredibly well written. But this really is just well written. You get to explore these characters and get to know them, maybe because of the page count, but more than I feel like I have ever truly gotten to understand characters. And even though the plot is so slow and there's barely anything to really share, it's just a really interesting exploration of these families and these people. Then another classic, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This one is orange here, not so much orange here. It's got peacock feathers. I think maybe just the gray is starting to feel like fall, the later days of fall. So The Picture of Dorian Gray is about this artist whose name I definitely remember, Basil. Oh my God, I remembered it. Basil is doing a portrait of Dorian and introduces Dorian to his friend Henry, and Henry has a lot of thoughts and feelings about the world and people and has a lot of monologue and makes a lot of judgments and is like kind of exhausting to read when he's going off on these tangents, and his impact on everyone around him is explored in here. And we follow Dorian as he becomes his own person, because when Basil starts painting him, he feels like he is imparting so much of his personality into Dorian, and the portrait is such a reflection of him as an artist. And as Dorian meets other people and becomes a part of like society more so than he has before, he starts to like control his own narrative and takes on the influence of the people around him and how he moves about in the world and makes poor decisions. And it's also about how he impacts the portrait itself. I gave it a 5. It's another one hard to sum up because it's just like the reasoning is it's a classic and I don't know what to tell you. It's incredibly well written. It brings in so many concepts and ideas that aren't new, but just phrases things in such a beautiful way that it makes sense why millions of people have connected with it. Unlike that, even though this is a classic, more modern classic, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, this one didn't hit as hard for me. I am giving it a 2.75. The cover is stunning and definitely has the fall vibes, but it is about this shepherd boy who gets an idea, has a dream, a vision, and is then inspired by everyone around him who also says that they feel strongly for him that he needs to go to Egypt and that there's something waiting for him. And so he's on this personal journey where he's learning from everybody that he meets and gaining life lessons, and at the end, you know, getting what he needs. I do understand why this one works for people. I just didn't like it, but I don't know how to, much like the other classics that I love, I don't know how to sum up why I didn't love it. I just didn't connect with it. I tried not to read it like it was trying to teach me certain lessons, but maybe I just didn't appreciate those lessons the way that the book wanted me to. No ill will towards it, okay? Next, I've got The Doloriad by Missouri Williams. And this one, I just feel like the vibe is kind of fall because it's just a little sad looking, like things are dying. And the way this embodies the story so well and just like makes you feel uncomfortable when you understand what's going on, and the descriptions of like the earth and the moss and the holes in the ground and the things that happens there. How do I explain this? Okay, so this story is a dystopian situation where there's like the whole world, post-apocalyptic, everyone's dead except for this small community, and the community is run by this woman called the matriarch. It's like a religious cult, religious sex cult kind of, and all she they want to repopulate And the only way to do that is with the family that exists. So it's an incestuous situation where she is producing children and they are producing children, and people are born with deformities. And we have a character at the beginning who is kind of being sacrificed but survives it. And that's what kicks off what's going on in here, because the matriarch is now being challenged by various people if what she is doing is correct. It's very violent. I think it's in the horror category. I guess that's fair. I would call it like literary absurdist fiction. It's horrific and gross and not fun to read, but has a lot of interesting things going on. It's one of the most dense books I've ever read. Like the one I just flipped to, this page has one paragraph break in the entire thing. There isn't dialogue breaking it up. There isn't really clearly defined chapters. It's just this very dense explanation of all of the characters and how they are doing grotesque things to each other. The description of fatness is the most present. There is one character who everyone who sees her, talks to her, engages with her, is just describing her disgusting, in their opinion, fat body, hurting her and describing what that feels like. It's a weird one for sure. I can't think of who I would recommend this to. I don't want to rate it. However, the only reason that I've read this is because I picked it out of my members' TBR jar, and the agreement among ourselves is if I like, as in give 4 or 5 stars to 6 of the 12 books that I pull out of the TBR jar, 1 a month for the year, I will continue it for the next year. And we are so close to hitting 6. It's been 5 and I've got 4 more reads to go, including this one. And so I'll tell you, this isn't the one. This isn't the one making it a 6. But the only reason I need to rate it is to tell you that if it's on the bad side or the good side of what has been happening with the members' TBR jar. Interestingly, it like has some qualities that reminded me of my least favorite that I pulled from the TBR jar so far, Redder Days. The other things that have not gone well have been romance, and there've been some weird, more quirky wins for sure. So this one I think is actually like my only 3-star that I've given. So fortunately, it's not one of the worst things I've ever read. But unfortunately, it's not the one that is going to make us move forward. I still need to find that. We've got 3 more to go. I'm really just proud of myself for finishing this. I will say there was a couple moments that I skimmed. And so the person who asked me if I had to reread a book before the end of the year, which one I would pick, it would be this one, because I think also once you get to the ending, you get to have questions, which is kind of fun and interesting. And if I got to reread it, I think maybe I would have more answers to the questions I have at the end, or I just think there's more to gain on a second reread. Not that there's twists and turns and reveals, and that if you read it a second time you'd read it differently, but because of just how dense it is and how much I just wanted to get through it, not that I think I could enjoy it more, I'm sure it would be the exact same rating, but I think there would be more subtleties to be gained through a second read. It's definitely unique and unlike anything that I've read before, and anything like you'll probably ever read before if you decide to pick this up, but don't ever dare say that I recommended it, because it's nasty, and not in a fun way. Like, I promise, not in a fun way. So for the person who asked if it's worth pushing through, I guess my answer would be no, because it doesn't really change in any way. And if you are already just not liking it, I don't think that's gonna change. It was a 3-star for me the entire time. Next up, I feel like this cover is perfect for the season because of little monstrilio down here on the cover. It really is the perfect October read. Not if you're looking for something that is creature horror, like true creature horror, but if you're into more literary horror, this fits the bill. There is a live show happening this weekend. You still have time to read this, and I would 100% recommend it because I gave it a 5, and I would love for you to be a part of the discussion. The audiobook is on Scribd, and I think it's only like 8 hours if you listen to it on normal speed, and it's definitely one that's conducive to being sped up. You have time to pick it up. I recommend you do. It is definitely up there with the other literary horror that I've read this year. In it, we're following this couple who has a child and he dies. And she decides to take a piece of his body after he dies and keep it. There's a folk tale that she hears about where it could possibly like bring back your family member, and she does that, and the piece of him becomes sentient and becomes this creature that they call monstrilio. And it's told in 4 parts, all from different people in Monstrilio's life, including Monstrilio. There's a little time jump where you see Monstrilio not just be this creature, but be a human being. And the people who are spending time with him are, you know, grappling with like what they've created, and if it's appropriate for them to treat him as if he is Santiago, the child that died, or if he is his own being and can make his own decisions. They feel protective of him, but they also are terrified of him because of the things that he is doing and the ways he's putting people in danger. I'm just very excited to have a full discussion about this and get into all the things. But yeah, it was very much for me, and I'm so glad that I picked it for my book club. Then we've got these two, which definitely have the Halloween vibes. I have one more cover at the end that I don't have a physical copy of yet. It's on its way, but I read it as an ebook. So Schrader's Chord by Scott Leeds is a horror novel. I gave it 3.75. It is about this man and siblings, his family. They have lost their father, and they inherited, or he specifically inherited, like the record shop and the family business. And so there's a lot, especially in the buildup, of him deciding what he wants to do with his life, if he wants to go with his father's wishes, or he wants to live the life that he wants. He has a career, he has certain things going for him. And one of the things that he's inherited is this series of records, and there's a note attached to them, and he ends up playing this record with siblings and friends, and they unleash this like kind of evil. Schrader is the villain of the story. It's a very clear horror movie villain that you could very clearly imagine, and they have the ability to kind of communicate or unleash the paranormal or the dead. And so they spend the book trying to fix that and right their wrong. For the question of what would make a good movie, I think definitely this one I would watch. For the question of who I could imagine writing this differently and maybe I would enjoy it more, I was thinking about the horror authors who do insert like a romantic relationship but do it in a really well done way, which was the biggest flaw of this. Is I feel like it focused on the wrong characters, and I didn't want to learn about this kind of like romantic relationship. It reminded me kind of my feelings of Black Tide, where you're reading from this man writing horror, and it feels to me as a reader like he wanted to insert a relationship so it could, you know, reach a broader audience who don't just want, you know, the jump scares and the heavy metal vibe of the horror that they want to write, and therefore they don't really put the time and development into the romantic relationship or the character development into the people who are in the relationship. So it just feels like such an unnecessary part of it. And because we had that character and we were following that character and we had to care about that character, I just wanted it to focus on other people. And so I was thinking like maybe if this was written by Josh Mallerman, I think the way that he handles relationships is very interesting, or Stephen Graham Jones, who would probably like omit the entire relationship but still could have pulled off the grittiness of this. I think this is a debut, and I would read from him again because it's a unique premise. I thought it was interesting to follow. It definitely has a slow build, so if you're looking for just an action-packed horror from beginning to end, it's not really that. There's some emotional depth to it, but just like all of the elements that I liked didn't go far enough for it to be a 4 or above, you know? I have no real gripes with it. I just don't think it met its full potential, but I would recommend it for the vibes. Another one I would recommend for the vibes is The September House by Carissa Orlando. Unfortunately for me, this was a 2.5. And I think that's just because I don't love cozy horror. I think I've kind of I've read a good amount of cozy horror and have aligned myself a little bit with cozy horror. And so if that's the way that you see me, I feel like you would think that I would like this, but I didn't. In here, we're following a woman who lives in this house and it's haunted, and there are ghosts surrounding her, some of them more engaged with her than others. One of them like literally cooks her food for her, hangs out with her, and she is just kind of used to this life. She doesn't obviously want her life to be like this, but she wants to live in this house. She can't afford to move. She's just going with it. And there really is only 1 month of the year where it gets really bad. And because of that, we believe at the beginning is why her husband is gone. He can't take it anymore. He has fled. And that's what she tells her daughter, and their fully grown like adult daughter comes back to visit and try to figure out where her father is. And so the mother wants to keep her from knowing everything about the house and tries to clean up all the blood and tries to hide the ghosts. And it's really just their back and forth dynamic while they're trying to solve this mystery that I think as the reader, you already know from the beginning what happened. And if not, like reading from this woman's perspective, you understand that she already knows everything and she's just not giving you the details, which isn't my favorite type of satisfying read, just withholding information for no reason for so long. I kind of found these characters insufferable. You're just reading their back and forth dialogue, questioning each other for many days, interacting with the police, going to meet them, trying to get them to take it seriously. And I think that it can be fun for people, this like goofy kind of horror. There's no reason I would dissuade anyone from this if they're already interested in it. Like I think it does everything just fine. It definitely has the horrific descriptions, but it's almost like in a parody kind of way. So I didn't love it, but I see why people could and are. And this is actually the one that I would recommend for the person who asked if I could go into any of these book settings, even though I'd be like, if I'd be totally fine, nothing bad would happen to me, I might go to this one because the descriptions are very interesting of all of the creatures, characters that she's interacting with, and the blood just pouring from the walls. It sounds like something I would like to visually experience, just like from afar. Oh, and for the person who asked about a good queer recommendation, let me go back to Monstrilio because this was kind of unexpectedly queer. And then the last book I read is The Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Lori Gilmore, and this is a small town romance. I gave it a 3.75. I'm leaning towards a 4. The more I think back on it, I did enjoy it. I was questioning it in the first like half because if it wasn't gonna get like steamy, I felt like it was just a little too like soft and delicate, but it did go there. It was very warm and inviting, and this small town Gilmore Girls feel where our main character is moving to this small town for the first time and she's taking over the Pumpkin Spice Cafe from a family member. And she's now responsible for caffeinating the town. And so they want her to open up. They want her to hurry up and get to it. And one of those people that's helping her along the way is a guy, Logan, who is like a local farmer, and they immediately fall for each other. So it's pretty insta love. There's a little bit of miscommunication running through the entire thing. It's like a safe amount. It doesn't get too dramatic and ridiculous. He has a certain history with relationships that makes it hard for him to open up. And our main character, whose name I cannot remember, is like new to town and just trying to, you know, find her way. It's simple, it's sweet. There's not a lot of depth, but I can't fault the book in being the exact tone that it wants to be. And it does get pretty sexually explicit for that second half. So it's hard to like perfectly recommend because I feel like if you just love the sweet, simple, innocent Hallmark stuff, it'll catch you off guard. I want a little more fun, a little more banter, a little more longing and tension. So yeah, maybe I'm talking myself into the solid 3.75. Which I did say in the video, but I've been thinking more about it. And now somebody asked the best restaurant name. And this one obviously is it. Like if I was opening a restaurant, I would call it, of all of the options here, I call it the Pumpkin Spice Cafe, but then it would have to be a cafe. They actually mentioned like organizing the video in that way. So that would be an interesting thing to think about. I think maybe I would call something Schrader's Chord. That doesn't really sound like a restaurant, but that's one of the only other ones that comes to mind besides, I mean, Poison for Breakfast, which if you're gonna name your breakfast cafe that's terrifying. Oh, maybe though the Razor's Edge would be an interesting one. That would have to be a pretty gritty restaurant. An author I would read again is Easy. That is Hanif Abdurraqib. People have recommended me directly. The other, like he has an essay collection that I definitely need to pick up. So that's the one that comes to mind first. though I would read from any of the other authors that I gave a 4 and a 5, especially. Actually, even Carissa Orlando, The September House wasn't my favorite, but I do feel like maybe I would pick up something else from her because I had no issues with the writing. And then somebody asked, what author would you want to read from who blurbed one of the books? Because I have this whole blurb series. So I guess I would have to look at my favorite book of the month, which would be Monstrilio. So let's see who blurbed this. Alexander Chi, Sarah Gailey, Maria Alderman, Akil Kumarasamy, Peter Ho Davies, Eric LaRocca, Anna Reyes. I think the only one that I have heard of that I haven't read from already is Anna Reyes, who wrote The House in the Pines. So knowing that she was really into this, if she was chosen to blurb it, maybe hers isn't just like a mystery, maybe there's some weirdness to it. So that's who I would choose from this blurb list. But if there's someone else on here you think I should, let me know. Anyway, that's everything that I read this month. Or last month. This wrap up's a little bit late. I will also have a quarterly wrap up soon, which is going to be very fun to talk about my favorites from the last 3 months. And yeah, that's it. I will see you soon with another video. Bye!